So there's a lot to say here, but I do want to move on and kind of keep things going. And again, you have access to the text here, and so I would encourage you all to kind of check in on those things that I maybe skipped or maybe haven't gone in as deep as I could here. But I want to skip down to where Dr. King capitalizes I must, okay? And this is a couple paragraphs down after the focus on laws as it relates to justice and injustice. Excuse me. And this is where he brings up, I think, kind of a really kind of interesting aspect of the dynamic here of this fight towards equality, this fight towards ending segregation. And his insight here, I think, is quite profound. So I'll read the text and then I'll kind of provide a little bit of continued feedback here. I must make two honest confessions to you, my Christian and Jewish brothers. First, I must confess that over the last few years, I've been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in the stride toward freedom is not the white citizen's counselor or the Ku Klux Klaner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace which is in the absence of tension to a positive peace which is the presence of injustice, who constantly says, I agree with you, I agree with the goal you seek, but I can't agree with your methods or direct action, who paternalistically feels that he can set the timetable for another human's freedom, who lives by the myth of time, and who constantly advises the Negro to wait till a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. Now let's break that paragraph down. Okay? So again, Dr. King makes the claim that the white moderate, or someone that is kind of like standing on the sidelines that says, I believe in your cause, but I'm not going to get too involved. Or that's kind of standing on the sidelines and doesn't, say, I believe in you, I don't believe in you, but just kind of like passively engages, right? Or tries to say, you know what, why don't we just wait a little bit until it's a more convenient time for you to fight for this fight, right? That person that Dr. King brings up as the white moderate, right, is more, as he says, is the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in the strive toward freedom is not the Ku Klux Klaner, right? It's not the strive for freedom is not the Ku Klux Klaner, but it's the white moderate, right? And he makes this kind of connection that shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding of people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection, right? Like you can understand where the Ku Klux Klaner is coming from, Dr. King says, right? And in that very hateful and white nationalist sense, right? What's more bewildering is the white person, as Dr. King is writing here, the white moderate, is a greater stumbling block to freedom than the Ku Klux Klaner. For the white moderate isn't outright rejecting anything, isn't outright saying, I support your cause, I don't support your cause. They're just kind of idly sitting by. Or if they do support the cause, they're not doing anything to advocate for it, right? And so for Dr. King, he finds this much more bewildering and much more frustrating, and ultimately, right, is trying to convince and ultimately wants to try to encourage more that are on the fringes, more of those white moderates that are on the fringes to become more involved, to become more passionate about the cause for freedom, right? And anyone that just kind of like sits idly back and says, well, let's just wait for a more convenient season, right? That ultimately hurts the cause much greater than it could. Okay? So again, this kind of focus on the white moderate, I think, is a really kind of fascinating aspect of Dr. King's letter that deserves some attention. Okay. Moving on to the next page here. And again, there's a lot of text. I'm not going to kind of dive all the way into it. But there are various kind of, again, aspects worth looking here. And they say, again, Dr. King's responding to these 8 white clergy people that claim that what's happening in Birmingham of all these nonviolent protests, they're claiming, that it's a bad time, that they should just wait, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and that ultimately, right, that there are some extreme measures being taken. And Dr. King responds to that in the following way. He says, "Oppressed people cannot remain oppressed forever. The urge for freedom will eventually come. This is what happened to the American Negro. Something within has reminded him of his birthright of freedom. Something without has reminded him that he can gain it. Consciously and unconsciously, he has been swept up in what the Germans call zeitgeist, and with this, his black brothers of Africa and his brown and yellow brothers of Asia, South America, and the Caribbean. He is moving with a sense of cosmic urgency toward the promised land of racial justice." And again, thinking about how Dr. King talks about just and unjust in the previous video, and moving towards racial justice, moving towards a place where there is this uplift of personality, where there is this uplift and encouragement of expression, encouragement of self. Okay? In the next paragraph here, right, but as I continue to think more on the matter, I gradually gain a bit of satisfaction from being considered an extremist, right? And we hear this language all the time of like, they're really extreme, or, you hear all this language often about the extreme right or the extreme left. And those, I think, those kind of dichotomies have especially a place to be very kind of wary of. But Dr. King kind of like spins this on its head, right, and says, but as I continue to think about the matter, I gradually gained a bit of satisfaction from being considered an extremist. Was not Jesus an extremist in love? And then quotes a Bible passage. Was not Amos an extremist for peace? Again, cite something else. Was not Paul an extremist for the gospel of Jesus? Right? Was Martin Luther an extremist? Right? And so he kind of goes through this long list, and again, noting and appealing to kind of biblical figures, right, with Jesus, Amos, Paul, etc., but also brings up Thomas Jefferson. And then he goes on and he kind of harkens back to that, what he just started, which was the white moderate. I had hoped that the white moderate would see this. Maybe I was too optimistic. Maybe I expected too much. I guess I should have realized that a few members of a race that is opposed to another race can understand or appreciate the deep groans and passionate yearnings of those that have been oppressed, and still fewer have the vision to see injustice must be rooted out by strong, persistent, and determined action. Okay? And there's more here in this letter. And he talks more about the church. He talks more about kind of religious leaders of the South, and the way he ends it, right? I think is again very, very kind of powerful. Where he says, "If I have said anything in this letter that is an understatement of truth and is indicative of an unreasonable impatience, I beg you to forgive me. If I have said anything in this letter that is an overstatement of the truth and that is indicative of my having a patience that makes me a patient with anything less than brotherhood, I beg God to forgive me." Right? And so I hope that kind of in diving into this letter, we can appreciate kind of the power that Dr. King brings to us, right? And the power that Dr. King brings to us back in the 60s, and thinking about his focus on justice and thinking about what it means to be just, right? An unjust law and a just law, of thinking about those that just kind of like sit idly by, that kind of neither denounce nor embrace and support various kind of causes, right? And the fact that a lot of the things that Dr. King is writing about, have again kind of reemerged over the last couple of months in these kind of social, political discourse, right, as it relates to race relations and racism and race inequality. And so I hope as we kind of close kind of with this, we can appreciate what Dr. King offers us, some of these thinking points, these talking points, and we can again kind of connect and recognize what he was writing in 1963 might have very good carryover into 2020. Okay? So I appreciate it if you made it this far. This is video number 5. I appreciate your viewership. I appreciate your participation. And there will be questions about Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham jail on the midterm, all referred to and all kind of all those questions, will be something or some things in these videos. So thanks for kind of diving in this far, and I hope that this leaves you with more to think about and more to consider, but also kind of grateful that you dove into this text. So, cheers.